Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today's video is going to be a little bit uncomfortable, okay? Because we're going to be talking about some pretty serious topics, and I'm not going to shy away from them. Ladies and gentlemen, you may have probably noticed there's a massive controversy on Steam right now. A whole bunch of video games have just gotten removed. And yeah, Steam changed the rules a little bit. There is actually a lot of content that is now never going to be allowed. Now, if you've ever been to the Steam store, there's a lot of games, games that you and I play, games that the mainstream loves to enjoy. But there are ways to turn off the content filters on Steam and get access to a whole bunch of 18 plus experiences that you probably can't find anywhere else, okay? Now, I'm not somebody that plays 18 plus games on Steam, okay? I think the closest thing to an adult video game that I've played is probably like Honey Pop at this point, or maybe like a dating RPG back when I was a kid on Newgrounds, because, oh boy, there was some crazy stuff on there. But generally, when it comes to adult stuff, I have a simple rule. If I ever have to goon, it's a simple matter of just going to an adult website, right? I don't need to have a controller in one hand and my cock in the other. Simple as that. But there's a lot of people that I guess love their PC game gooning material. Now, what kind of video games got removed in this entire story, okay? So let's look through some names. Now, for individuals that went to the Steam database, they noticed that these titles got removed from the store. Titles such as The Redemption of Li Wei, okay? Or what about Incest Twins, Episode 3, Incest. Futanari Incest. Daddy Twins Incest. So a lot of these games are, these sort of visual novel slop titles. I would say that the grand majority of humans are not probably missing a massive zeitgeist of information losing this material, okay? And to give you an idea, some of the actual things that are featured here are pretty illegal, okay? You can't be incestuous, at least in the United States of America. I don't really know about the laws in Canada, but it's very frowned upon ethically, okay? In some cases, we are looking at illegal relationships here. And I suspect that this is one of the reasons why these games were removed. But it wasn't. Actually, there was an entire organization that was kind of championing the victory in this. Now, when these games were removed, an organization like Collective Shout came out and said, "Major win! New policy on Steam. Incest and rape games are being removed. Since we launched our campaigns calling on payment processors to stop facilitating payments," some of these games that Collective Shout was referencing also, I guess, involve themes with children as well, too. The gaming platform has added a new rule to their policy. And what is that rule? Content that may violate the rules and standards set forth by Steam's payment processors and related card networks and banks or internet network providers, in particular, certain kinds of adult-only content. So yeah, basically Steam is not operating on their terms of service anymore. They're actually putting the terms of service of the payment processors like MasterCard, like Visa, like PayPal above their own. So basically the controversy here, if you're not picking up, is that none of these games, I guess, violated US federal law. Otherwise, they would never have existed on Steam in the first place. These games also didn't violate Steam's own laws, because Steam still has the most insane shit on their platform. Shit that is, I would say, almost as bad as some of the stuff that was removed. No, if anything, the real decider is, the real censorship magnet is MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, the people that process our payment services, right? Now, to give you an idea, these services are pretty much the sole control over what the fuck you and I get to consume on the internet. So to give you an idea, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, a lot of these organizations, they're private companies and their entire job is to float money around, right? So every time you go to a place and you whip out your credit card, generally speaking, let's say you buy a video game for 60 bucks on your credit card. It's from MasterCard, right? You use your MasterCard to buy it. MasterCard basically will float $60 over to the actual company you buy at that moment. Now, at that moment in time, they will take your money out later, or you'll pay them back, whenever you feel like it, or whenever they request your money. And yeah, basically, they're just these companies that float money. They credit you money, right? That's how they operate. Now, it's because of this model that obviously they have clauses where ethics and morality are included. And so if they don't like who you're, transacting with, they can just deny their services to those organizations, and it can be catastrophic. So, Steam is an organization that obviously relies. I don't think I've ever made a purchase on Steam. After I got a credit card, I had never actually used any other payment method other than my Visa. That was about it. So to give you an idea about how much control they have, even if something is legal in your country, and let's remove the adult content for a bit. I had a buddy back in the day who, this is when like Canada had like federally legalized marijuana, for instance, and he got into like weed stocks. He got so into the marijuana game that he opened up his own farm, and then he also got into e-commerce. Now in Canada, this was an entirely legal venue to go down. He had all the licensing, everything down there. But after he started up a store, he ran into a bit of issues with his payment processors. In this case, I believe it was like Visa or MasterCard, one of the two. And because of this, he actually lost, I would say, most of his sales, if not all, because it was the primary payment processor on the e-commerce website. A private company can basically dictate what you do, all right? They're able to censor things at a financial level. And again, finances are so weird because, again, these are things that are so tightly controlled by a very small group of companies all over the world. They basically get to decide who gets to operate in their field and who doesn't. And again, some of you might say, Muda, but Bitcoin fixes this. And that's true. But I would say that, stable coins are more the option in that regard. Bitcoin's just too erratic of a currency. But now we're talking economics. Let's get back to Steam. So this organization, Collective Shout, I wanted to look a little bit deeper into this. Are they honest people that really care about the protection of individuals? Now I go to Collective Shout, and a lot of this organization, it's a very effective organization, by the way. They've targeted not just Steam, but they've also targeted brands like Playboy. They've targeted Temu, for instance, where they had apparently these, child doll heads, for instance. They're a very active organization. And of course, when I went to their About section, for instance, they apparently are a grassroots campaign movement against the objectification of women and whatnot. And it's a good thing, right? Like on surface, when you read this kind of stuff, I am actually all for it. I'm against, the objectification. I'm against really bad elements. Collective Shout is for anyone concerned about the increasing pornification of culture and the way its messages have become entrenched in mainstream society, presenting distorted and dishonest ideas about women and girls. So looking closer into some of their board members, for instance, looking into this organization, obviously their founder, who is Melinda Tankard-Reist, is again a person that is very against gooning, anti-prostitution, anti-abortion, feminism, violence against women. Now, when you get past the surface level of it, right, like the messages all seem really good, it becomes pretty apparent that this organization is more interested, it seems, at just blanket censorship of anything that they find to be too adult, if you will. So for instance, back in 2014, you may remember a little small game like Grand Theft Auto 5 ended up dropping. Well, apparently these guys ended up getting involved and they went after Target Australia. A call was made by 3 women who had apparently worked in the sex industry and had first-hand experience of the type of violence they contest is prevalent and inappropriate in the popular R-rated game Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, again, I don't know much about how much the adult industry is in GTA. I played it a bunch, so unless we're talking about the fucking vanilla unicorn or something and picking up hookers, it is a pretty tame game compared to the shit that was just removed off Steam. But according to it, Target literally caved in and removed the game from their shelves. Now again, that's a pretty huge win for any organization. Jack Thompson would have came at the thought of getting Grand Theft Auto potentially removed from a retailer. These guys actually did. So even beyond all of it, it shows that their level of censorship goes even deeper. There was a game called Detroit Become Human. It's one of my favorite David Cage slop games. I know that everyone always rips on it for like his games being movies. But look, I played them in one sitting, okay? I love me David Cage movies, okay? It is what it is. So they actually ended up calling out for the removal of Detroit Become Human. They said it depicted child abuse and violence against women. They did not want it to be sold in Australia. Now, it shows me that, look, these are people that care more about video game censorship because they just do not agree with anything that isn't, I guess, wearing some level of hijab or something that doesn't touch upon, something that even touches upon adult themes. They want gone, okay? Because God forbid the children, even though this is an M-rated game that touches upon mature themes, exists. God forbid it does. Let's get it removed. Now, if you actually played Detroit Become Human, what they're referring to is one of the first, hour segments in the game where you play as a character named Kara, a android. And so she basically is going back home to her master, and her owner, and he has a kid, and basically there's one scene where he actually like starts to attack the child. He starts to chase her through the house, and it's a pretty intense segment, right? And it's one of those intense segments where like her character's programming breaks and she goes and rescues the child. So yes, it's a serious situation. It's presented in an adult video game. It's presented in a mature title. So, it shows you that this organization, they don't just want to remove the gooning games, okay? They don't just want to stop there. If you can remove the gooning games, that's all fine and dandy. But let's see if we can remove basically any mature game, right? And these people want to control what you and I get to consume. And it's crazy, right? Like, the video games that we just mentioned, GTA 5 and Detroit Become Human, literally do pale in comparison to movies like Taxi Driver or really mature movies that are still distributed on some of the biggest streaming platforms today. These people are focusing on video games because honestly, it's a far easier target. Instead of really focusing on even actual illegal material, stopping video games and stopping movies, stopping fictional media from existing in this situation, right? Even if you don't agree with that fictional media, like there's a lot of those Steam games that have been removed that I don't give a shit about. I really don't care that Incest Fister 9000 got removed off Steam. But the idea that it is as harmful as real, actual, CSAM organizations, real violent organizations, is fucking laughable at best. And it really shows you that these people are more in line with pushing their conservative, worldview where all of this media gets banned in the name that we're protecting children and women and everything. So obviously the payment processors jumped in because obviously when you're having a title like demand the payment processors to stop facilitating all of these like really nasty things, yeah, clearly the payment processors are going to jump in because, their public perception is being fucking threatened. Now, if you actually look a little bit deeper into this, it shows you that there are laws that, affect these payment processors in ways where in some ways you could say they're compelled. So a few days ago, you noticed that PayPal had stopped getting actual payments to be processed, right? So one user writes, I'm trying to purchase a DLC. We are temporarily unavailable to process transactions with this payment method at this time. We apologize for the inconvenience. So he says that no VPN's on, web browser is not outdated. Apparently it seems that, maybe PayPal kind of shut out a little bit. They kind of stayed away. Now, to give you an idea, some of these payment services like Visa and MasterCard have recently been compelled in entire complaints or has been brought up by judges as being participant to some really not nasty behavior. So the reason why, one of the reasons why I want to make this video is that when I was researching this Collective Shout organization, it had a lot of ties, it seems, to another organization that you might know if you follow my channel for a long time, known as Exodus Cry. Now again, when it comes to Exodus Cry, you may remember a story that I covered a long time ago called Trafficking Hub. I was actually reached out by the organization Exodus Cry. And, they kind of told me about the real evils of the adult industry. And it's one of the reasons why, ever since, then, I have been basically no gooning, okay? Simply because once you see how the sausage is made, once you see how really filthy the adult industry can get, it's not that I'm against people consuming this kind of stuff. I'm not against people even making it or, being willing, consenting participants. It's just that it's a really disgusting industry. And it's one of those things where even if I don't agree with Collective Shout and I don't agree with the hyper conservatism of Exodus Cry, I can still see that it's, these are just organizations I as a human being don't even want to be participant in or consume the content of, because there are some really nasty stories. So again, when you look at Collective Shout, they are kind of, partnered, or at least they partner a little bit with organizations like Exodus Cry. And again, they call upon things like age verification on websites, porn filters, defaulting on devices, legislation requiring effective protections. And some of these legislations can involve a lot of states and a lot of governments requesting our IDs and putting them in databases for the purposes of accessing these websites, right? And again, I don't believe in a lot of that because of a privacy and security aspect. But again, trying to criticize an organization like this when they use children and like women as shields can oftentimes be really difficult. You have to really treat this gingerly when talking. Because again, I really do care about the children and the women, but ultimately these organizations really want to push their agenda and in some cases push technologies that honestly can be far more dangerous in the long term and far more dangerous in a wide dragnet, if you will. But to look at some of the most disgusting shit out there, for instance, if you think that these payment processors really give a shit about the children or women, you're actually dead wrong. So for instance, this is a court case from Jane Doe's, all right, a bunch of women who requested against companies like Alo Media or MindGeek. If you don't recognize that name, it's a company that kind of just changes its identity. They basically run most of the adult websites in the world. And so if you actually look into it, this is an insane story where apparently two individuals, Michael Pratt, Matthew Wolf, two people that you've probably heard me talk about in the last few days, this was about a studio in San Diego, California, known as GDP. Okay, I'll let you figure out the initials right there. So what they did was, for over a decade, they used force, fraud, and coercion to get hundreds of high school and college-aged women to film videos that they sold on the internet. This illegal publication of the trafficking videos upended the victims' lives. Because according to these victims, they didn't even know, they weren't even told that these would go up on one of the biggest adult websites in the world. And so there was a lot of victims that requested their information to be removed. So for instance, in one situation, one of the victims writes in a takedown request to Alo, "I was scammed. The company lied to me about this being on the internet. They told me it would only be available on DVD on Australia. My work friends and family all know, and this very link is being sent around. I want to just die." I mean, it really is like shocking, right? Like if you work in the adult industry, I'm sorry, like getting a job, you may lose connections to parents that are very, it's just a fucked business to be in. If you're not transparent about something so sensitive, you are committing, in my opinion, fraud. So according to this lawsuit, Alo knew the victims' claims of force, fraud, and coercion were legitimate, and they kept the highly profitable videos published on websites despite the harm Alo knew it would cause the victims. Over the years, the evidence corroborating the victims' claims of force, fraud, and coercion mounted. So again, it wasn't until when the FBI got involved and took down GDP, one of their premier partners on the site, that, Alo decided, yeah, maybe it's time to remove this. I mean, it really took a lawsuit. It really took there was one situation where I covered in the Trafficking Hub video where a girl that I was talking to made so many takedown requests that went unheard until she just impersonated a lawyer, and everything just changed overnight right there. When you have to start impersonating lawyers and counsel, that's when you know things go too far. Now, it's because of this that there were certain judges that looked at this story and also through the payment processors, because they were brought up by Exodus Cry, right, as being kind of facilitators to this disgusting behavior. And it was kind of hard to not sort of think of that as a reality. So for instance, in a 2022 lawsuit by Fleets versus MindGeek, there was a judge, Cormac Carney, who actually denied a motion to dismiss from Visa where they plausibly were alleged by the plaintiffs that Visa knowingly facilitated the monetization of CSAM material that was hosted by, a lot of these sites by MindGeek and the Hub. And the judge even allowed discovery into like Visa's role too. So again, it was possibly a situation that could have became something of a RICO, if you will. Now, there are certain laws that bring these payment processors in. So for instance, two laws that I've dug up, 18 U.S. Code 2252 and 2255, are actual laws over here. So for instance, certain activities relating to materials involving the exploitations of kids, right? Now those laws, it allows victims that are violated. So for instance, 2255 would allow people that are violated by 2252 to actually seek a civil lawsuit, which again is totally good. But again, 2252 is more about the criminal penalties of knowingly transporting, receiving, or distributing, or possessing. And again, the knowingly part is important. If you know and you've been raised awareness that, this organization is doing something wrong, and I guess knowing is maybe there's a fucking FBI investigation that is, publicly known that maybe there's some possible human trafficking, you should shy away. Again, these organizations have morality and ethics clauses, but it really seems like that is very rarely enforced, if enforced at all, unless, of course, they absolutely have to do it. Just to give you an idea, even earlier this year, there was a whistleblower that came out that said that companies like MasterCard and Visa failed to stop payments on sites like OnlyFans, one of the biggest adult sites in the world, for child content, right? That was from a whistleblower right over here. And this is just one thing. We can go down the entire list of terrible things that have happened in this situation. And again, what they said was a senior compliance expert in the credit card and banking industries, that was a whistleblower, so the two giant companies knew their networks were being used to pay for illicit content on these websites. And they accused them of turning a blind eye to flows of illicit revenue, right? And again, these were complaints that were filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, so FinCEN, for instance, right? And the US DOJ and the Homeland Security Department. So these were not small things. These were people, this was a serious case. This is a serious situation that is being chased. And again, it's because these organizations really don't care about the children. Look, at the end, Steam removing a bunch of games that I don't care about, I'm not ever going to play those games, and I really can't care. But the reason why this is a bad precedent is, again, it puts more power into these payment processors to censor the kind of material that we watch. If the government doesn't say it's bad, if Steam's TOS doesn't say it's bad, then is it really something that should be removed? Should we really be championing any form of censorship unless, of course, it really does truly violate the law? Which, if it does violate the law, and we've decided as a society it does, there really isn't any harm in it. But these payment processors can just arbitrarily decide that without any form of discussion. But the thing that burns me a lot too is these payment processors deny us stuff. They deny us everything. And they still don't really actually care about the root cause of this problem. Stopping a video game that is saucy on Steam isn't ultimately going to stop actual criminal trafficking behavior. There are still scumbags in the world that are trafficking human beings, abusing women and children. And just because you stop a fucking hentai game on Steam, just because you stop a video game like Grand Theft Auto 5 from being sold in your state, doesn't stop illegal activity. And that's the story. These payment processors oftentimes have been exposed for not giving a shit about the people in the first place. So all of this is just reactionary stuff happening because one organization raised enough of a shout, using men, women, and children as actual shields to push their censorship agenda. Look, whether you agree with the game existing or not, whether you agree with a piece of media or not, is kind of a null and void thing. The real argument here is these payment processors that don't give a shit about anybody ultimately decide what you and I cannot purchase. And where does it end? It's porn now. But what happens if down the road a hyper left-wing organization raises enough of a fucking, hullabaloo and they want to remove guns from video games. They want to remove something from video games, right? They want to remove anything. And they use children as shields, right? Imagine if an organization came out and said, school shootings are really bad, which they are, obviously. Let's remove games like Ready or Not from storefronts because it has a school level. And, a payment processor ended up getting involved and Steam removed Ready or Not, or they removed any kind of video game. That's the level of censorship we're talking about. Imagine if a political dissident, imagine if something you and I don't agree with politically, that was removed because of something down the road. It doesn't end with this. And it shows you, even organizations like Collective Shout, they didn't just end at the Gooner games. They went to things like Detroit Become Human. They went to things like Grand Theft Auto 5. So that's the question to ask. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.